In the series Legend of Zelda, Link is well known to wield a weapon called the Master Sword. Almost like King Arthur and the Sword in the Stone, it is a weapon that is designed purely for him. It responds to Link alone, and the sword itself appears to have a soul of its own inside of it. So, when Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was announced, I was naturally very curious about what weapon Zelda would wield. Would she herself wield Link's Master Sword? Or would she fight with a sword in hand of her own? As we all know by now, the answer was yes, and also no. In the beginning of Echoes of Wisdom, Link saves Zelda from being encircled by an ever-growing rift, and before the rift swallows Link whole, he leaves behind his weapons for Zelda to wield. She, however, is incapable of using them as freely as Link. Every swing costs a resource for Zelda, and that particular resource bar drains quite quickly, and isn't the easiest to refill. This high cost renders the Master Sword and Link's bow as more of a backup choice more than anything else for Zelda. In a move none of us really saw coming, instead, Zelda was revealed to wield a weapon of her own, a magical rod named the Tri Rod. And what a wonderful choice that was, in my opinion. A weapon that forces its user to think, to use their wisdom, rather than unga-bungaing their way through the field. It just makes so much more sense that Zelda would fight as something more akin to a mage than a knight, like Link. And, just as Link's Master Sword has a soul, the Tri Rod too would not even be if it weren't gifted to Zelda by a remarkable sidekick of her own, Tri. So, naturally, in today's video we will not only pay homage to the Tri Rod, but also to Tri. I'm going to attempt to make my first ever keychains where Tri and the Rod hang out together, so that whoever carries them around knows that without Tri, there would be no wielding the Tri Rod. A philosophy that even Zelda herself seems to follow, for when Tri leaves, she too puts the rod to rest. Alright, let's get started. And yes, I am serious, Mudo. I'll grab some aluminum craft wire to form the skeletal bones for our Tri Rod. I've never made a miniature weapon before, and so even though I think making Tri will be exciting and fun, it's sort of impossible to resist the curiosity of what it's going to take to make my first ever inorganic item and first ever weapon modeled from a video game. I'll grab some old wire cutters and then cut off a long portion of wire. Once I have roughly measured to what I want to use, I'll fold it in half and twist the folded pieces of wire together. Once that's done, I'll unravel the top of the cut wire and begin wrapping my mind and the wire into a form that resembles the looped-looking top of the Tri Rod. You may be wondering at this point, what's that bruise from? And unfortunately, this whole process took me so long, and this was filmed at this point so long ago that I have no idea. I'm pretty certain it was from a completely uninteresting event that wouldn't exactly make for a cool story. Humans just do be like that sometimes. Getting bruised on the occasion in the most mundane of ways. This process takes me some time. I'll make sure to do my best to make sense of all its angles. I'll often convince myself it looks great from one angle, and then turn it just a little to reveal something that looks totally off. After some patience though, I eventually get there. Excited again, I begin to ready to cover up the wire with clay. But joke's on me because I soon learned that this skeleton is still going to need a little more structure yet. The strength of the wire is much too meek, simply way too wobbly to work on without warping the shapes I've made, so let's rewind the quick wrapping job and take some more time to reinforce this piece with some tough epoxy clay. As you may have seen in my previous video, this stuff is very messy, so I'll be making sure to put on some gloves while I handle the epoxy clay. Once one is done, I'm just mad enough to make another two in the exact same way. When I'm done covering them all up, I give them some time to rest and cure fully. I'll sand them off camera and then finally start to wrap some cosplay onto the piece. After smoothing and taking more clay away, I'll select a point that feels right to start detailing. I notice the base of the looped section of the rod will require me to create a winding illusion. The entire twist tightens at the neck, so I'll start to add clay there and attempt to make a convincing twisted connection sprouting from the singular wire. As I'm doing this, I notice that the light overhead of what I'm doing gives me a lot of information. Looking at where the light sits and falls helps guide me to make sure everything looks like it's resembling some kind of perfectly twisted slide that you'd see in a park somewhere. Turning the sculpture upside down and getting a new perspective also helps to make certain I'm on the right track. When I'm done, I'll give the sculpture its first bake so that I can safely hold on to what I've just sculpted as I begin to detail the bottom section of the rod. To me, when I look at my reference, I see 3 rows that get slightly larger, fanning out to meet this triangular cone shape. I'll work my way down, and as I do, I find it to be much more difficult than I thought it would be. It's something that ends up taking me several tries. I feel very determined though to get things right. At first, I spiral the column shape down a little too horizontally compared to the fall that you can see in the reference, which appears to be more of a vertical slant down. Something about trying to get this detail right though just feels very cool and classical. You can just imagine this shape in a historical building or street. It feels very architecturally inspired to me. Another detail perhaps wisely chosen for Zelda. It's not unusual for items and weapons to be drawn from real-life inspirations. For example, in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, a lot of the Zonai elements look similar to designs you would see in ancient Aztec art and architecture. Anyway, it took me a moment to realize that the angle of the column was a bit off, as evidenced by myself here. Thumbs up, right? Wrong. So I cut everything I've worked a while at off, and noticed something else. Not only did I get the angle of the slant on our column wrong, but I also miscalculated how short I had to cut the epoxy-covered wire. So I mend another piece to the bottom to give me a little more room to work with, and try to get these little mage rods as close to what I'm seeing in my reference. In order to keychainify these rods, I'll take some stainless steel loops, use a pair of scissor tweezers as well as my wire cutting tool, and open up the circle to fit another circle inside. The second circle I'll squish to a more vertical shape. All this to add some extra security so that it's not just a single loop stuck into the sculpture. After smoothing out the pieces with some alcohol, I'll let them dry and give them a second bake. Once they're out of the oven, I notice that the top half of the sculpture's proportions are looking off, so I spent some time bulking them up. Maybe I could have made their bottoms less juiced up, but I think overall, when you see the entire piece thickened, it just looks better. It feels more like the clay weapon that these are meant to resemble at this size. More thick, more tough, or something like that. The rest of my time with these rods are spent nitpicking over details like this. The third rod I ended up re-sculpting the bottom half of 3 times. After baking the sculptures, if there are any issues I'm seeing, I'll sometimes just selectively cut off sections carefully with an X-Acto blade, and then mend and rework the shape I'm trying to get with fresh clay, and send them off into the oven again. Each of the 3 I added some clay to the tops of, to try to mimic the double looped looking effect that you see in Zelda's Tri Rod at some angles. The last thing I attempt to refine before moving on to making my Tri sculptures is the centerpiece of the rod. In my reference, you can see that the area caves in a little. The shape looks as though it is perfectly tailored for a hand to grip onto it. On each end of the section, the piece flares out where it begins to meet the spiraled top and bottom of the rod. So it's important to me to try to fit this in on each of the 3 sculptures as best I can before I put them down for real. Sometimes you just really need to spend time with something to understand it properly. Something about this design looks so deceptively easy to create, but making these 3 took me so much longer than I could have ever anticipated. After I'm done fussing with the Tri rods, it finally becomes time for me to make Tri themselves. I'll start off with 3 small sphere shapes made of crumpled tinfoil, and start to build on them to make them into the ethereal being and sidekick to Zelda that they are. Once the foil is covered with clay and smoothed out to a round shape, I'll cut out even strips and begin to give our creature a little more cake. I find Tri's shape to be super charming because their roundness is not quite uniform. Viewing them from the side, they have a pretty plump shape on their backside. I mean, just look at how far out their body goes from behind their legs. It's incredible, and I mean that, honestly. One of the reasons why I love sculpting is because as you familiarize yourself with different shapes for different characters, you begin to gain an appreciation for the way everyone uniquely takes up space. It's all beautiful. Speaking of looking at Tri's legs to back body measurement, sticking on some imperfect for now legs will help guide me. The legs to me become an anchor point to start to more accurately map out where to add clay. And speaking of body positivity, look at this little turkey shape we've made as things are coming along. Little one is looking so tough already, I can hardly handle it. Along with their legs as an anchor point, I'll also begin to make a little nub at the top of their head. In the reference, this nub is pretty far back on the top of their head in most photos, but later on I decide to alter this design. The weird thing about making sculptures is trying to make it look right from all angles, and my idea is to hang them up by inserting a string of sorts into that nub, but I came to realize that Tri would be staring at the floor while being held up, and I'd like the world to see their face, so I end up moving it quite a bit closer to their eyes. I just don't think Tri is the depressed type. As I'm working on Tri's body composition, I take in that they have a little bit of a curvature around where their lower tummy would be. So let's honor that tummy and lay out a piece of clay at their hip line to begin to work in the detail. I'll smooth it out and add clay surrounding around it to make the whole look more seamless. Once it does, I'll carve out a little half circle shape that I see in the reference between Tri's legs and refine everything else on their body before I begin sculpting their eyes. What eyes Tri has as well. Probably just about the coolest part of their design. Something about it fits so well into the world of Zelda. The first time I saw them, their entire look reminded me so much of other characters that to me seemed to draw inspiration from gesturals, clowns, and geometry. I used to be obsessed with looking at Zelda's concept designs in their official art books, and I can just imagine Tri's design being cooked up in a drawing. It's so much like so many others I've seen from the Zelda universe. In particular, their facial features and their body shape remind me a lot of Midna from Twilight Princess. They also have a touch of Girahim from Skyward Sword to me. Unlike these two characters though, Tri's demeanor is nothing but sweet. It's just such a playful design. The way their eye connects to their mouth, the whole look is just so innocently head empty. Their eyes never move, and yet they are never disturbing in that sense. Just cute as heck. Tri's whole personality sort of embodies the fish out of water trope. They've come from a mysterious rift, and everything in Hyrule is new to them. Heck, even emotions are new to them, which at times lacked a bit of sense to me, but hey, that sort of trope never really gets old. It's always nice to be around somebody with a fresh perspective, somebody who has a zest for things where you might have lost them, to help reignite your own appreciation for the world you live in. So, thank you, Tri. You make for lovely company. As usual with me, I'll try my best to pay my respects to you. I'd make a mold and cast you into gold for the streets of Toronto to be properly admired if I could. Anyway, after spending some time sculpting the flower-like eye of Tri and looking at it from all sides, I decide to take the sharp end of my tool and lightly carve around the outer eye, inner eye, and mouth. Something about this, outlining the eye's shape with white clay and then carving around it with my tool, helps to clean up the look. It's kind of like the same effect as carving out an eyebrow on a face with concealer. It just sort of eats. My camera dies before I move on to the next eye, but it's thankfully a lot less interesting to watch compared to the uni eye / mouth. I end up deciding that with this eye, it, like the other, looks the best cleaned up with white clay circling around the shape. I, however, decide that carving into it doesn't work for this eye. Since we're dealing with an animated, cartoon-like character, sometimes their designs look disturbed a little if the eyes aren't laying flat to their face. To me personally, at least, I think so. It gives off the appearance of sunken eyelids, or something to that measure.
Why does Pikachu look like, I don't know, like a ghoul? Like, why are his eyebrows like that?
I know, it is sort of sad. Like, the graphics kind of like took a turn for the worse, and in terms of the way that like the models look.
Need a IGN side-by-side Detective Pikachu 1 and 2 comparison.
Yeah. I don't know. Pikachu's so cute to me, you know? It's like, how dare we say he's creepy? You know?
How dare you?
like,
how dare you?
It can quickly trend toward a creepier looking style, which isn't necessarily bad, depending on what you're going for, of course. I'll smooth Tri out with alcohol, then prepare Tri to have floating triangles added to their design. I thought about how I would do this for a while, and I figured the best looking result would come from some sturdy looking fishing wire. Why this one in particular though has a cancer warning on it beats me. I'll cut off more than I know I'll need just to be safe for now, and then stab Tri at their nub. I'll feed the nylon wire in as far as I can into the sculpture. It will only go so deep before hitting the tinfoil inside. After sealing it up and fixing the nub, I'll prepare to cook up the Tri in the oven to cure and secure the wire in place. I wasn't sure at first if this wire would be able to withstand going into the oven without melting, so I cut off a piece earlier and tested it out. Since polyamor clay is baked at a fairly low temperature, I had high hopes it would be okay, and I happened to be right. I just wouldn't really suggest anyone else to do this because while I can't say for sure, I feel like whatever fumes it might cook up could be hazardous to breathe. I made sure to open my windows while I did this, just in case. Tri is a fairly simple design, but even still, at this point I've spent over a month sculpting them and the 3 Tri rods, and I keep thinking back to my last video where I showed off a polyamor clay artist using cosclay to make a mold. What if I could speed up the process of making the other 2 by making a mold? Well, I wanted to give it a try, so I looked into it even further. I realized, how in the heck is this artist doing this without the clay bonding to each other? I dug through their socials and eventually found out that they explained that a specific product is needed to help with this issue. The brand Cosclay sells a liquid they call a C1 separator. You simply paint the cured sculpture you want to make a mold of with this liquid, allow it to dry fully, and then fresh clay that's added to it will release after it too is cured. So, let's give it a shot. I'm excited and also have no idea what I'm doing. But I never thought I'd be able to do this sort of thing at such a low cost, so what's there to lose? I'll wrap some fresh clay around Tri once the separator has dried totally. It's a bit of a confused struggle for me, but I do my best. I want to try to split the mold evenly in half and make some connectors for each side to fit into. I also try to be mindful of the nylon wire, making sure to make space for it in a way that I think makes sense. After some messing around, I end up with a half decent looking side. I'll cure it and then paint it with half of our separator before making the other half that will connect to it. When that's all done, I'll begin stuffing my mold with clay. This could be done in a neater way, I'm sure, but I'm still pretty new to this and I don't actually want to bake them in the mold, since I need to insert their mostly invisible looking wire still. Things mostly work out and easily save me a decent chunk of time. After this, all that's left is to resculpt the eyes and mouth on the 2 copied sculptures. To me, everything went exactly as it should have for a first-time experiment making a mold. Woo! It works, even if you want to do it in a strange sort of way, like I did. So, speaking of things I was talking about in my last video, I mentioned then that I wasn't totally sure about what level of grit to sand my pieces at. So, when I was putting in an order for my C1 separator, I also did a little digging online and found out that most people like to sand with a lower grit and move their way up to a higher number. I bought some new wet and dry silicon carbide sanding sheets at 400 grit, 600, and 1200, thinking that it should be at the very least much more sufficient than what I was doing previously. So I mask up before sanding and cut out some strips of each strength and sand everything down. The rods in particular were a little more troublesome to clean up, but I found out that holding long strips between 2 fingers and weaving the strip into the top of the rod and sort of sawing the pieces between my 2 fingers worked quite well. After what feels like has been this entire year, and really, it has been a good chunk of it for me to get here, I'm ready to finally paint my pieces. Once I start to get into it, I realize that the colors on the Tri Rod and on Tri is more than just an ombre of yellow to green. Looking more closely at my references, the top of Tri and the Tri Rods are more of a warm/neutral leaning yellow. The middle section of the rod turns into a cooler yellow, and the end blends into a green, with the bottom of the rod being a little deeper of a green than how it begins. It's a pretty beautiful blend of colors. When you have lighter tones and tones that are similar to one another, it makes blending them together quite a bit easier as well, thankfully. The neutral/yellow tone takes me quite a while to get right. I play around with the different tones of yellow and white I have on hand, and give some time for the paint to dry between each layer I paint. The banana potato Tabo figurine and baguette squishy in the background of this video ends up proving themselves to have pretty practical uses as I use them to anchor the rods in different positions to keep them upright and wedged upward to more effectively and safely dry them. Well done, Nanotabes and Company. Well done. My very own Moogle pin I made around 2 years ago also ends up serving in this process as well, saving the wet paint from collecting dust. I use a combination of techniques to blend my colors together, painting directly over top dried sections, and thinning down the paint with water where and when it's needed. And once moving on to where the yellow meets the green, I work more so with wet paint. Blending colors while they are wet is usually the easiest way. As I like to say, and truly believe though, it doesn't matter how you do it, as long as the end result looks nice. Tri is painted similarly to the rods, with the same blend of colors, but their eyes, particularly their flowery eye, takes a bit of time. It's careful work. Anytime paint gets outside of my lines, I'll paint over it with white to clean things up. Now for the trickiest part of painting their eyes, and again, trickiest with the flowery eye, is painting around them with yellow paint to start. What makes it especially hard is the carved out parts of the eye. I carefully tuck in the color into those more 3D parts of the eye, and anytime yellow paint splash out onto the black, I can get a clean brush with water and sort of erase it off the dried black paint. Once I'm done lining the eyes, I'm kind of delighted to see that this look really suits Tri. They look like a little clown. An unexpected but very welcome part of this whole process. I make sure to spend some time filming them in this state, as well as taking some pictures. It's seriously so awesome to me that I even have decided to make digital drawings of the clown Tri. But, alas, it is not the Tri we all know and love, and so I do end up filling them in with the yellow to green paint, just like the Tri Rod. After I'm done painting, it's time to glossify up everything. It ends up becoming another amusing step of the process that I never really imagined how it would look until I got there. I decide to weave some nylon wire into the circle loops on the Tri Rods, grab a cooking rack and some containers, and tie the rods to the cooking rack to dry them between each layer of the gloss enamel I paint on them. A satisfying look for the rods. They look pretty cool hanging upside down, which is perfect because that's exactly what made most sense to me for how they would be orientated for a keychain. I use a similar technique with the Tris, but instead of tying them up to a cooking rack, I use heavy coasters to hold them up. Whenever I move them around, the dance they all do just gives me an immense amount of joy. Just look at them. I can just tell already by this that they are all going to look awesome out there in the wild, going on adventures with me, and whoever else ends up snatching the other two eventually. Once they are glossed up though, Tri is still missing something important. Can you guess what? I'll give a hint. Those parts of themselves they lend to you to materialize items and enemies into Hyrule with a wave of Zelda's Tri Rod. Yes, of course, I'm talking about their triangles. Up until this point, I had no idea how the heck I was going to make them. I figured I wanted them to be pretty durable and maybe nice and soft to touch as well, so I searched around for fabrics I could use laying around my home to cut into triangles. I ended up picking out some pretty thin mesh material from a reusable gift bag I had laying around. Since the material was so thin though, I ended up cutting a thicker bag to place in between the mesh fabric. So each triangle is actually 2 pieces of mesh fabric with a thick piece of a fabric bag glued onto one of the mesh sides. I'll leave the other mesh side for now. The plan will be to sandwich the pieces together to the nylon wire eventually. The coloring was all off though, so I make a bit of a mess fixing that issue and let them dry before moving on. This triangle business is another one of my favorite details about Tri. The way they gain more triangles as the game progresses reminds me a lot of a beautiful game called Journey. In Journey, you wear a scarf that floats behind your character and grows longer and longer as you progress. When physics are done well in a game like that, and like Tri's triangles in Echoes of Wisdom, It's such a calming treat for our eyes and for our brains. It's things like this that remind me that we are truly living in a blessed timeline. Gluing the triangles onto Tri is a little scary and stressful, but I get there. When I do, however, I realize that the triangles will likely not weather well with the paint hanging out on the fabric as they are, so I end up painting several layers of glossy enamel onto them as well. The end result kind of looks like leather. Not quite as soft to the touch as I was originally imagining, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. We're finally almost done. I'll assemble the keychains for Tri and the rods and keep them on separate clasps because, I don't know, I just decided it was for the best that way. There can be creative control this way for myself and whoever ends up buying them as a pair together. Before I reveal them, I want to take a second to give some further appreciation toward the gift that was Echoes of Wisdom. What made me want to sculpt these two things so much and dedicate so much of my time toward doing it? At the end of our journey, my mind was pretty made up. It was a cool experience, but I wasn't overly blown away until I got to the final boss fight of the game. The theme that plays in the fight is such a masterpiece. It feels like the music is triumphantly reminding us of everything it took for us to get here, with familiar motifs playing throughout. I've never cried during a boss fight before, but damn, that theme just swells up my throat every time I hear it and brings me to tears. I remember being overwhelmingly grateful for the experience for that moment alone when playing this game. And then, I was hit again after the fight ended. We have to say goodbye to Tri. Not sure what it is about goodbyes, but that too always gets me so emotional. I have a similar reaction whenever I've beat Skyward Sword as well. When our friend tells us it's time to go, something inside me just breaks the heck down. So that's why I just couldn't make the Tri Rod alone. Present me doesn't want to say goodbye to our friend. Present me wants to keep experiencing a fun adventure with Tri, and with the wonderful gift of a weapon they gave to us. So here it is. I hope you all like it. And thanks so much if you've all stuck around. I know waiting for my next videos is like weird as heck. I promise you I'll alert you if I ever decide to stop doing this. Like I've said before, I don't have any plans to stop anytime soon. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more like this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button as I will be uploading many more like it to come. Next up, I'm planning to make something very special from a beautiful game called Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Be sure to follow me on my socials @SoClayAboutThis, especially on Instagram if you'd like to see updates on what I'm doing. And if you're curious to see what kind of stuff I like to repost on TikTok, there's fun to be found there too. Cheers, and as always, it's been wholehearted and genuine. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.